Have you ever actually stopped to wonder how massive, deeply vibrant cultural movements just die out? Or on the flip side, how these centuries-old, incredibly rigid institutions can suddenly burst back into life? Well, today in this explainer, we're diving into a genuinely fascinating historical dynamic. We're looking at the massive cultural shifts that happen when a movement loses its fire, and the completely disruptive forces that bring it back from the brink. We're drawing all of this from the brilliant historical analysis of Dr. Roger Green, and trust me, it's a wild ride. To really wrap our heads around the sheer scale of what we're talking about, let's look at 19th century England. Back then, an estimated 65% of the population regularly attended church. It was this vibrant, culturally dominant force, right? But today, roughly 150 years later, that number has absolutely plummeted to an estimated 3%. England has basically become a non-church-going country. This is a stark, textbook example of what historians call institutional decay. Movements of the spirit, it doesn't matter how powerful they are at the start, they eventually settle down. They lose their vitality, they suffer from sheer inertia, or they just get entirely suffocated by their own rules. So here is the crucial takeaway. History operates exactly like a giant pendulum. It's always swinging back and forth. On one side of the swing, you have these incredibly spontaneous, imaginative, grassroots movements. But as generations pass, usually by the time you hit the second, third, or fourth generation, that original fire kind of just fizzles out into this rigid, suffocating dogma. The institution becomes obsessed with rule following instead of, experiencing any real joy or vitality. But just when you think the institution is completely dead and gone, boom, the pendulum swings back, sparking a massive evangelical resurgence. Okay, let's jump into Section 1, Awakening the German Church. Let's actually trace this pendulum in action. We're going to jump way back across the timeline to 17th century Germany to look at the very first major reaction against a stalled, dogma-heavy institution. Look at what happened to the German Lutheran Church. The incredible spontaneity of Martin Luther had completely settled down into what we call Old German rationalism. It was highly scholastic, it was entirely focused on intense philosophical arguments and dogmas. Basically, the head was moved, but the heart was completely unmoved. But then enter the disruptors. A movement called Pietism came onto the scene. They were totally over just sitting and listening to dry, dusty sermons. They wanted a practical, everyday devotional life. They championed this beautiful true marriage of both the head and the heart. The whole strategy for this movement was kicked off by a guy named Philip Spener. In 1675, he wrote this wildly popular book called Pious Longings, which essentially became the ultimate pietist playbook. Now, Spener was a good Lutheran. He wasn't trying to leave the church. He just really wanted to wake it up. He pushed for a massive emphasis on the Word of God to bring people back to life. He reminded everyone about the priesthood of all believers, which basically meant everyday folks could pray for and counsel each other without constantly needing a priest to step in. He also strictly insisted on no controversy. They were going to disagree in love, absolutely no toxic religious battles. And crucially, he completely revolutionized how ministers were trained, demanding that schools produce not just brilliant scholars, but in his words, scholars and saints. And that incredible momentum carried right into the second generation. A new leader, August Frank, took Spener's playbook and literally put it into practical action. First off, he looked around his hometown of Leipzig, saw a desperate need, and just started building orphanages. He called this Christianity in action. Second, he invented something called the College of Piety. Now, this wasn't a formal university. It was actually small weekly cell groups of everyday laypeople just gathering around to study the Bible and sing hymns together. And third, he took this super academic doctrine of justification and completely reframed it as the living, breathing presence of Christ inside the believer's heart. Real, tangible stuff. Moving on to Section 2, the Moravian departure. So what happens when a renewal movement pushes back so hard against a rigid institution that it literally breaks the container? Well, that brings us to a huge, charismatic pivot point. Count Nicholas Ludwig von Zinzendorf. I know, with a fabulously long aristocratic name like that, you might not expect him to be a rebel, but he absolutely represented a radical shift. He was heavily influenced by Spener and personally trained by Frank. But unlike those two, he gathered this massive group of followers in a region called Moravia. Eventually, he felt that to truly be faithful to the light of Christ, he had to break away from the original Lutheran institution entirely. And, it wasn't some hostile, bitter split. It was just a natural evolution. He took his followers and formed the fiercely independent, incredibly influential Moravian missionary movement. Which brings us to Section 3, America's first Great Awakening. Now, let's watch that pendulum swing all the way across the Atlantic Ocean. While Pietism was totally reviving Germany, a parallel movement was bubbling up over in the American colonies during the 18th century, kicking off what we now know as the First Great Awakening right around the year 1734. The main catalyst in the colonies was a guy named Theodorus J. Frelinghuysen. He was a minister in the Dutch Reformed Church in New Jersey. And just like we saw in Europe, the American churches had mostly settled into the suffocating, predictable cycle of decay. But Frelinghuysen acted as a true grassroots disruptor. He was an itinerant preacher, meaning he traveled from church to church, and he sparked these incredibly intense revivals that spread like wildfire from New Jersey straight into Pennsylvania and the Middle Colonies. And this next story brilliantly illustrates how these grassroots movements almost always start out completely marginalized. There was a Presbyterian named William Tennant, and he was so fed up with the dead, boring state of his church that in 1726, he just decided, you know what, I'm going to train my own sons for the ministry, right here in my log house. Of course, the religious elites gossiped and mocked him relentlessly for it. They derisively called his little setup the Log College. But hey, William Tennant definitely got the last laugh here. He lived just long enough to see his heavily mocked Log College evolve in 1746 into what we all know today as Princeton University, literally one of the most prestigious top-tier universities in the entire world. Unbelievable, right? Now, one of those actual sons trained in that very log cabin was Gilbert Tennant. Gilbert ended up hearing Frelinghuysen preach one day and was just deeply, deeply inspired. He took those exact same blazing convictions and applied them directly to the Presbyterian churches. He successfully brought life and massive revival back to congregations all across New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. This was your classic revival from below, just everyday people and rogue ministers completely shaking up the established decaying order of the day. All right, Section 4, the Grand Itinerant. So sometimes a movement from below meets a massive, wildly charismatic force from above. 7. Just let that number sink in for a second. 7. That is the staggering amount of grueling, treacherous, absolutely brutal trips that George Whitefield took across the Atlantic Ocean in the 18th century. Remember, there was no luxury air travel back then. Crossing the Atlantic was a nightmare. But because of his completely insane dedication to reaching the American colonies, this British Anglican earned the legendary title, the Grand Itinerant. When Whitefield finally arrived, he didn't care about labels. He crossed all denominational lines. He'd preach to absolutely whoever would listen, anywhere he possibly could. And he drew crowds that were literally unbelievable for that time period. I mean, even his good friend Benjamin Franklin, who approached this whole thing like a skeptical scientific investigation, he actually circled the massive crowds in Philadelphia, did the math, and verified that an estimated 10,000 people were standing there, completely captivated by Whitefield. And remember, he was doing all of this entirely without a microphone. It's mind-blowing. Because he constantly preached in the open air in places like the Boston Common, he faced some seriously incredible opposition. I mean, people would go to extreme lengths to ruin his sermons. You'd literally have guys sitting up in the branches of trees blowing a trumpet directly at him just to drown him out. Haters would beat loud drums and blow horns to disrupt the gathering, but absolutely nothing stopped his dramatic, intensely charismatic preaching. And because he totally refused to rely on established, indoor church buildings, Whitefield went ahead and designed his own portable, pop-up field pulpit. It was this ingenious, custom, collapsible wooden contraption that actually had stairs. He could march right into the middle of any town square, unfold this pop-up pulpit perfectly, preach to thousands of people, fold the whole shebang back up, and just right off to the next town. He was literally a one-man institutional disruptor. So, after reaching millions of people, completely shaking up the establishment, and surviving 7 brutal ocean crossings, where do you think this famous, historic British Anglican is actually buried today? Take a second. Take a guess. Maybe back home in England? Surprisingly, no way. He is buried in Newburyport, Massachusetts. He ended up passing away during his 7th trip to America. And per his own explicit wishes, this world-famous British Anglican was buried directly under the pulpit of a local Presbyterian church, where he remains to this very day. Honestly, it's such a fitting end for a man who crossed every single boundary just to bypass a dead institution. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a provocative thought to chew on. If history is truly this massive pendulum, always swinging between decaying, rigid institutions and explosive grassroots resurgences, well, take a look around our culture today. Where do you think the pendulum is swinging right now?